Thank you all again for attending tonight's meeting. This is the second public meeting the New Mix Project has had. However, if you missed the first meeting and would like to learn what happened, you can go on our website, newmixwaterbury.com, and view the presentation and also a link to the meeting because it was recorded. Before we delve into the topics of tonight's meeting, I did want to remind people that the New Mix Project is separate from the Rehabilitation Project, which is currently in construction. The Rehabilitation Project will be extending the serviceable lifespan of the Mixmaster interchange for about 20-25 years. The New Mix Project is planning for that time, butting up against the 20 years and beyond, the long-term future of the interchange. At our first public meeting, just as a brief recap, we introduced the New Mix Project, the current state and issues of the interchange, as well as the purpose, need, goals, and objectives of this early study for the long-term future of the New Mix program. Today, we will cover the universe of alternatives for the New Mix. And the universe of alternatives are all options that are being looked at, but will be narrowed down through a three-tiered screening process, which we will explain tonight. So a little housekeeping, so to speak, for people who might not know how to mute, unmute, chat, or raise their hand in Zoom. Simply move your cursor to the bottom of the screen, and for mute or unmute, it says the word, but there's also a microphone. You simply click it on and off. For video, and you don't have to be on camera, but if you'd like to, click on the video camera icon. Click on it again to stop video. To chat, you can leave a comment in the chat anytime during the presentation. Click on chat, a box will pop up. You type there as shown, you send the message to everybody, and then when you're done, you simply X out and the box will disappear. Finally, if you'd like to raise your hand at the end during the Q&A session, you have to click on the reactions and the raise hand or lower hand icon at the bottom of the screen again. It's pretty simple. We also have real-time translation and in Spanish and Portuguese for this meeting. And this video will show you, it's a really brief video. If you've not used that before and want to access it, this video will show you how. Today's presentation provides real-time translation in Spanish or in Brazilian Portuguese. To select one of these languages for real-time translation, simply move your cursor to the bottom of your screen and click on the interpretation icon. When you do, this will pop up, and then you simply select the language you would like, Spanish or Portuguese. You don't need to click English if you want to continue listening in English. Protocols, of course, everybody here will be polite. Please use respectful language. I know we all will. One note though, at the very end of the presentation, there will be a question and answer session. And if there are extensive questions, we will at first limit people to 2 minutes, but that's only at first, just so that we can get around to everybody. And then we'll go back around again so that everybody has a chance to talk at least once and maybe twice. Also, the chat feature we mentioned, since the Q&A is at the end, if you think of something, question, comment, feel free to write it in the chat, and then you can refer to that during the Q&A. Before I hand it over to Jonathan Dean, CONDOT's New Mix project manager, one more thing we'd like to note is that Title VI law mandates that no person on the basis of race, color, or national origin should be excluded from participation or subject to discrimination in the development of this project. If you're interested in learning more about the Title VI and civil rights, flyer is available on CONDOT's website. And this presentation is actually already on our website. So you can simply go to the website and click on the link that's shown here to get access to the flyer. And one last thing, there's a totally voluntary demographic survey. And again, you can access that on the website. Ask some demographic questions, but it also asks your thoughts about the presentation and how the meeting went. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to John Dean, again, the New Mix program manager from the Connecticut Department of Transportation.
Thank you, Anna. Again, my name is John Dean. Welcome everybody, and thank you for taking time out of your busy evening to join us. I'm just going to introduce our team real quickly. From the Connecticut Department of Transportation, Mike Calabrese is the Division Chief of Highway Design. Neil Patel is the Principal Engineer of Highway Design Major Projects. Joe Belrose is our Project Engineer. HNTB Corporation is our prime consultant that's leading the consulting team on the study. Jake Argiro is the Project Manager from HNTB.
Angela.
David Schweitzer is the Deputy Project Manager. Chris Fagan is the Project Engineer. Naomi Hodges is the Environmental Lead. And Anna Mariotti is the Public Involvement Specialist. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Jake.
All right, thanks, John. And good evening, everyone. So we'll just briefly go through an agenda. So tonight, we're going to have a brief recap of the first public meeting. Then we're going to cover the universe of alternatives and the concepts behind each. And then we're going to talk about the first round of screening criteria. That's the level 1 screening criteria and the details behind how we're going to look at each of the alternatives and screen them out. We're going to talk next steps, when our next public meeting is, how we're going to approach the remainder of the study and the project and the program. And, but most importantly, we're going to have time at the end for questions and comments, as Anna talked about earlier. So let's talk about the New Mix project. So again, I really want to emphasize, as Anna spoke about earlier, the rehabilitation project is separate from the New Mix project. And the goal of that rehabilitation project is to lengthen the serviceable lifespan of the interchange additionally about 20 years. The construction that's in progress on the interchange is intended to extend that lifespan till the next major rehabilitation. Now, we looked at the next major rehabilitation, and where we needed to focus was the replacement of the concrete decks on the I-84 structure. How we go about replacing those decks because they will have reached the end of its serviceable lifespan. Now, the fact that they're in a stacked condition makes it extremely challenging and rather costly to replace those decks. And so the way we looked at being able to do that, looked at a replacement that required a 16-hour lane closure over a period of 4 to 5 years, creating major traffic impacts that would be extremely impactful, not only to the city of Waterbury, but the traveling public and in fact, the region beyond. So we had to look at alternatives, what we needed to do. And now we're looking at a major reconstruction and what the future would look like in the next 20 years for that new construction. So the New Mix project is that long-term planning study that looks at how to reconnect the interchange. It's anticipated that this is going to be phased over a period of time with an overall goal to modernize, improve the safety, the functionality, and while reducing congestion, which in turn can improve air quality, and align the project with the city's economic development and community goals. So these planning studies and analysis activities are conducted with input from you, the general public, the stakeholders, and it's going to produce transportation planning products that are going to serve both CONDOT and the city of Waterbury's transportation needs and meet the requirements of the regional transportation improvement planning process. So the PEL study is going to end up being a report and as well as a questionnaire that's going to be developed to help get to that point of the report. So if we go to the next slide, this is the area that we're going to be studying. So we're not only just looking at the interchange itself, the interstate highway. While we are looking at that, we're also looking at entrance, exit limits, the local roadway, the arterials, as well as the cultural and historic resources within the limits of this area shown on the map. So let's talk about the process. So with the goal, the overall goal to begin construction in the 2030s, there are a number of steps for us to get there. So right now in the first box, this is where we are today. We're currently in the midst of this PEL study with the goal to identify that range of reasonable alternatives for major reconstruction of the interchange. Followed up by the NEPA process. The goal here is to identify a preferred alternative in a record of decision so that we can move forward with the next step to move forward with the design and permitting process. Now, a number of years is required and a job of this complexity and this magnitude in order for us to get there to achieve the goal to start construction in the early 2030s. Going to the next slide, let's talk about the PEL study and the process. So each of the steps of the PEL study represent a lot of work, discussion, public feedback, and documentation. So at the first public meeting, we covered the transportation needs and deficiencies. The PEL study, the purpose and goals represent that draft, purpose, needs, goals, and objectives. And today, we're going to cover the universe of alternatives in the first round and only the first round of that screening criteria. And there's going to be 3 levels of screening that are going to occur over this PEL study. That's going to help us whittle down that universe of alternative that David's going to get into very shortly. So that's going to leave us with alternatives that are going to be closely aligned with the project purpose, the needs, the goals, and objectives of the department, as well as stakeholders in the municipality, the city of Waterbury. Going to the next slide. So one of the first steps in the process is the evaluation of where the deficiencies of the project are and determine the needs required to alleviate those deficiencies. Where we're really focusing on initially are the needs pointed to the structural deficiencies, the geometric challenges that we all face driving through the interchange, and the operational deficiencies. So this report was created that identified and can be reviewed via the project website, newbixwaterbury.com, and that not only did it identify those primary deficiencies related to the elements I just talked about, but it also talked about the deficiencies related to the multimodal aspect, the traveling aspect, the multimodal, as well as the community and environmental context, and the deficiencies centered around those aspects as well. So let's talk about the vision, the goal of the study. And this is really important, so I'll read it directly off the slide, but CONDOT desires to establish a vision or master plan for the interchange that addresses and balances the regional importance of the mixmaster for commuter traffic and motor freight users, while also improving multimodal services, local connections, and livability within the city of Waterbury to enhance and support social equity and economic vitality. This is based on the findings that we've previously described in our study, as well as substantial feedback from the general public, as well as stakeholders. So we initially drafted a purpose, needs, and goals and objectives. This was revised based on our PAC input, public meeting feedback, as well as website polls that we've conducted thus far. It's been refined based on agency input, and it is not finalized. In fact, I would consider it a living piece of the study right now, but we are looking to solidify and finalize that in late September. And we're going to utilize this for the development of the screening criteria going forward to, as I talked about earlier, to whittle down that wide range of alternatives to narrow down the reasonable alternatives we want to move forward into NEPA with. Again, feedback we receive from the stakeholders and the public have informed us. If we want to go to the next slide, Anna. Based on that survey responses we shared with you in the previous slides, that corroborate the analysis we performed, and it confirms the feedback we've already received. Again, focusing on major elements of the needs of the project, the structural deficiencies, the geometric deficiencies, as well as those operational deficiencies. And those become the primary drivers or focuses that we have. Now, below those lines on the bottom half of this slide, we have numerous goals and objectives or intended outcomes that can come as part of the replacement or major rehabilitation of the interchange. These include reduced congestion, which also relates to improved air quality, improvements to the local roadway network, creating opportunities to improve equitable access, multimodal facilities, multimodal access, just to name a few. But these are desired outcomes that can become, as again, part of the overall replacement of the interchange itself. So we're going to take a little deeper dive and talk about the universal alternatives. So I'm going to turn it over to David Schweitzer, our Deputy Project Manager.
Thank you, Jake. We can go to the next slide. And this here shows a funnel that shows that we've used in a lot of our presentations. But for tonight, we're going to focus in on that top piece. So as we focus in on this, you'll see the tools that Jake was talking about, the analysis needs and deficiency study, the related goals, and then also the needs and purpose. And with these and with the diverse team that we put together to put these alternatives together, we sit there and we identify the constraints and the challenges we have at the site. We look to comply with the state and federal design standards. We want to make sure we understand the program and the community needs for this project. And then we get that input from the diverse team that we have to develop these alternatives. And then we also determine our evaluation criteria from this team. Next slide, please. So when we look at the constraints, the considerations, and the challenges of a site, you got to look at the natural conditions. Here, we have some steep topography. We also have the Naugatuck and the Mad River and other water courses. You need to look at your built or human conditions, which is, the industry that's there, the railroad, the local roadways, your environmental justice populations, significant or historic landmarks, and then also hazardous material sites. You also have to factor in previous, ongoing, and planned projects and studies, and this can be at the regional, state, or local level. And then you look at funding that's going to be available to understand the feasibility for your project and how you're going to pay for it. Next slide. So this slide here is showing us a rendering of the existing conditions that are out there today. This is looking north, back up to the city of Waterbury. Along the left edge or the western side, you can see the Waterbury Hospital and that ridge line that runs along the west side. In the foreground, on the left, you can see the Riverside Cemetery and the chapel. You see Route 8 heading in the northerly direction, running parallel to the Naugatuck River. And then there's some industrial land with Jackson Street there, and then the existing railroads that are there off to the right side of the screen. Across the middle, running from left to right, is the stacked I-84 structures. And then at the core of the interchange, you can see the vertical difference in the 4 levels of the interchange that we have in this location. Next slide, please. So from this, the team that we have, we developed 23 alternatives, and they're broken into these 4 groups, and we're going to go through each one of these shown as puzzle pieces individually. The first one that we looked at is a no-build alternative. This is what's considered our baseline condition. This is if we do no improvements other than those that are identified in the transportation improvement plans. So this really is our baseline condition. The next piece that we look at are called travel modes, and these are more no improvement in, there are no improvements implemented other than those that will involve transit, rail, bicycle, pedestrian, and other modes of travel that will provide the solution to the purpose and needs and goals and objectives of the project. The third piece of this will be the rehabilitation alternatives. And as Jake talked about, these focused on the I-84 structures, replacing the decks on the I-84 structures. The current rehab project is replacing the decks on the Route 8 bridges. So when we looked to the future, we wanted to make sure we could replace the concrete decks on I-84. The fourth piece are the replacement alternatives. And these explore the full reconstruction of the mix master on different alignments, new structures and new connections between the main lines, both to the local level and between the main lines themselves. So if we look back at the rehab alternates, a few things to point out. At the end of a rehab project, your structures are still going to remain. So these will be 80 years old in the year 2045. You'll have complex and lengthy construction sequencing, and there'll also be concerns with the return on investment, your benefits versus your costs. So if we look at our purpose and needs and also the goals and objectives, with rehab alternatives, the opportunities to improve these or meet these is low. Conversely, with replacement alternatives, here we're looking at options where you have the complete replacements of the main lines, both I-84 and Route 8. You have new structures with new connections and the constraints that affect the feasibility of the improvements. So here, when we look at our purpose and needs and goals and objectives, our opportunities to improve these has greatly increased. Now tonight, or after tonight, you're going to get to look at these 23 alternatives on the website. We're not going to go through them all tonight, but what we will do is we want to point out some major features that you will see with these alternates that will help you understand and decipher these alternates. So the first major features here are I-84 and the Route 8 alignments. Now, I-84 runs east-west, while Route 8 runs in the north-south direction. Paralleling Route 8 is the Naugatuck River. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot the local level. And then below that is the local level, which is shown with the grid below. We also have the Naugatuck River, which parallels Route 8, flowing north to south. And then on the west side of Route 8 is that ridge line that we showed in the rendering previously. So if we look at the alignments with I-84, we can reconstruct it in place. We can construct it to the north, or we can reconstruct it to the south. With Route 8, we can move it to the east, as well as construct it in place, or we can look to move it to the west. And you notice that Route 8 wiggled there due to that ridge line and some landmarks that can make that a little more difficult. Another thing that we looked at is we looked at unstacked configurations. As Jake had pointed out, some of the problems with the stacked configurations, we looked at placing these main lines side by side. We also looked at a split configuration where we may take one bound, most likely with Route 8, move it to the other side of the river while the other bound remains in place. And we also looked at these side by side configurations at differing elevations. The next thing that we looked at is the interchange itself, these system connections. System connections are the highway connections between I-84 and Route 8. So we have options with those. We have a full system interchange with direct connections. Now, these are the roadways that stay within a highway environment to get from one main line to the other. And what a full system interchange means is that all 8 of these movements are direct connections. The interchange as it exists today is a full system interchange with all of those direct connections. The other option that we can have is a partial system interchange. And this is where you can have indirect connections, where the connection between the main lines must leave the main line, go down to the local roadway network, flow with local traffic, and then get back up on the main line of its destination. Now, this is usually used with traffic when traffic volumes on these movements are lower. And out here on this interchange, we have 3 candidates for this. We have the eastbound and northbound movement. We have the northbound to westbound movement, and we have the eastbound to southbound movement. Now, another feature you'll see when you go through these alternatives is you'll see crossover interchanges. And what that is referring to is how a system movement is made. If you look at some of the movements that are out there today, specifically, I'm going to focus in on the Route 8 southbound to I-84 eastbound movement. That is a left-hand exit and then a left-hand entrance as a direct connection. But we're trying to eliminate those left-hand movements. So what you end up having is you end up having a right-hand exit and then a right-hand entrance. But in order to achieve this, that system connection must cross the other main lines. And so that's why we're calling it a crossover interchange. It may go over, it may go under. A flyover ramp, like in downtown Hartford, is a very good example of a crossover movement. Another feature you will see on a lot of these alternatives are what we're calling combined connections, or where these system movements are being combined so that we have one less entry point on the main line that they are exiting or entering to. Now, this can go in several ways. We can have exiting system movements where, as this example is going to show, the Route 8 southbound and Route 8 northbound movements that want to get to westbound combine to form one ramp movement. So then it's one point of entry onto I-84 westbound. We can also have exiting combined connections. And in this case, we'll show I-84 westbound where the connections, the system movements to Route 8 northbound or Route 8 southbound would exit I-84 together and then split when they're away from the main line to reach their destinations along Route 8. Another factor that you will see a lot of while looking through these alternatives is the local connectivity. And this will include the placement of the service interchanges. Service interchanges are what brings the main lines down to the local level or from the local level back up to the main line. You also see frontage road systems. And these are what are used to connect that local roadway network. And the frontage roadways can be more of a one-way type of roadway system, normally in pairs that help promote a little bit better traffic and can be utilized as complete streets for pedestrians, bicycles, and other modes of transportation. And just touching more on that is the multimodal aspect. And this is where the urban design aspect of our diverse team of designers came into play. So then that's where we look at the transit, the bike, the pedestrian, and then we also get into rail considerations. So as you look at all these features, what we get is kind of a Mr. Potato Person sort of aspect with all of these features, because there can be a mix and match with a lot of these features. With some of them, we can have that mix and match, such as we can either have a full system or a partial system interchange. We cannot have both. But as far as combining our ramps or the crossovers or the alignments of the main lines, those we have different choices, and they can be mixed and matched through the alternatives. Now, all of these alternatives are going to be on the website, and the page that's going to greet you when you go to the website will look like this that's up here on the screen. And it covers the 4 squares that we did go through. We have our no build, we have our travel modes, we have our rehabilitation, and we have our replacement options. Now, some of these will have more than one, and that will break down into a tree as it falls down. Now, when you access these, there will be a how-to video that will be on the website to help guide you if there are problems. But you will click on one of these boxes, and it'll bring up that alternative. And then that alternative will show you the picture or diagram of the alternative. Plus, it'll have a verbal explanation of what is going on with that alternative to help explain it. So that is a overview of the universe of alternatives. And I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Naomi Hodges, who's going to walk us through our level 1 screening criteria.
Yes, thank you, David. So we did go through a lot of information there. Where I come in is talking about our screening process, how we will use this PEL study process in order to narrow down that universe of alternatives. So just getting back to this very trusty graphic and our trusty funnel here, you're going to be seeing this a lot because it outlines our PEL study process completely. For each project alternative within the universe of alternatives, they would be screened against our purpose and need and goals and objectives. We intend to develop criteria, and we have developed criteria, and that criteria will be used to evaluate all of the alternatives that exist within the universe. As we've mentioned, there are 3 different levels of screening during this PEL study process, with each level becoming more and more detailed. Today, we'll dive into a little bit more detail on the level 1 screening, which is our fatal flaw evaluation, very high level. I call it just a gut check of our minimal details of the conceptual alternatives that we have at this point in time. When you visit the website, you will see that the alternatives are pretty much just lines on paper at this point in time. And that's because we have very minimal details at this point in time. The second level is the medium detail level. That's where all the goals of the community and environmental goals come in. We'll be looking at those goals and objectives that Jake had mentioned earlier, and evaluating each alternative that can advance from that fatal flaw evaluation. Those alternatives will be evaluated based on their ability to meet those goals. So some of those goals that we've identified from just coordinating with the public and other members of the community is riverfront access, urban design considerations, complete streets, enhancing that connectivity, not only through the highway, but also at the local level, really looking at ways that we can expand that sidewalk network and those bicycle and pedestrian routes. At this level, we'll also look at environmental and transit options, and like I said, the ability to for these alternatives to meet the goals of our study. The third and final level will have the most detail. We'll be able to identify impacts more directly. We'll be able to identify mitigation opportunities. Those goals and objectives will come into more detail. We'll have a lot more information to work off of. And when we do evaluate those alternatives that make it to the third level, we'll be able to identify the reasonable alternatives. As I mentioned, with each level, we are trying to dismiss alternatives that do not meet either our purpose, needs, goals, and objectives. We're trying to just mostly get rid of those unreasonable alternatives and narrow down our 23 alternatives into something that's much more smaller, alternatives that are feasible and meet the goals of our study and the community as well. Once we have that smaller set of alternatives, we have them as PEL recommendations. We also call them our range of reasonable alternatives. That's what is going to go into that NEPA process, where it'll have an even deeper review for environmental record of decisions. So just zooming in here a little bit more, we are focused on our level 1 screening, a very high level screening for every alternative that's in the universe. We took the purpose, needs, and goals and translated them into criteria. So beginning with this level of screening, it is going to be pass, fail. It's very high level, just engineering based. As I mentioned, it's fatally flawed evaluation. So just trying to make sure if the alternatives that have been identified are feasible solutions. We're asking the question, can the alternative satisfy the purpose of the project? And does it have any fatal flaws? So the purpose and needs have been translated into criteria for each category. And beginning with the structural criteria, we are asking the question of, can the alternative improve or replace those deteriorating bridge structures? David mentioned that we were able to replace the Route 8 structures and decks with the ongoing Mixed Master Rehabilitation project. However, we have been unable to replace the I-84 decks. The decks that exist today are the original decks from when the Mixed Master was originally constructed. So one of the main purposes of this project is to be able to replace those existing bridge decks. For the geometric criteria, we want to make sure that we can address or improve the conditions that do not meet the current design standards. We've heard a lot from the public mentioning some of the lane widths and shoulder widths, and the criteria that existed back when the Mixed Master was originally constructed has been improved. And we want to make sure that whatever outcome of this study, those geometric conditions are to current design standards. Next, we have the operational criteria that is associated with how the traffic operates on the highway and local roadway. So for that, we want to make sure that the high volume movements can be made as direct connections. Those are the movements that are uninterrupted flow from highway to highway. We also want to make sure that the lower volume movements are indirect connections, and those lower volume movements have fewer vehicles on the roadway, where there can be where those vehicles can use the local road network in order to make those movements without adversely affecting the travel times. In addition to that, we want to make sure that whatever gets put back there or gets constructed or rehabilitated provides adequate capacity for the current traffic as well as the future traffic that is forecasted for the project. Then we move on to the fatal flaws, and those are cost and feasibility at this point in time. Very high level, starting with cost, we are just asking the question of, can financial resources be made available in order to construct this alternative? If it's determined that the costs are too astronomical, it's a fatal flaw, and unfortunately it would not pass. And then for feasibility, we are asking the question of, can the alternative be constructed using proven technology and engineering methods? And one key point to this evaluation criterion is that we have to make sure that traffic is allowed to operate during construction. It is key that I-84 continues to operate as it's a regional connector, as well as does not adversely impact members of the community who live within the area. Don't want to adversely affect those persons who use the interchange daily and for their commute. So just to give a very high level overview of this fatal flaw analysis at the level 1, we are asking the questions: can the alternative satisfy the purpose of the project, or does it have any fatal flaws? So if we go through, if we have an alternative and we are evaluating it based on this criteria, and it's determined that the structural criteria passes, the geometric criteria passes, operationally it's great, and cost, it, you know, is in our budget. However, feasibility is a no. Either it's just infeasible to construct, or there's significant adverse traffic impacts during construction. At this very high level of analysis, we would consider that to be a failure to satisfy the purpose of the project, and because it has a fatal flaw, and therefore this alternative would be dismissed from further evaluation. It won't move forward in our evaluation for the next levels. I do want to just highlight here that David did go over some of the features that you will see in these alternatives. If an alternative is determined to have a favorable feature, or a feature that is compatible and not fatally flawed, that feature itself could move forward in an alternative called a complementary feature, and that would move forward, whereas the full alternative would be dismissed from screening. And then again, just really highlighting this screening process, we are only at the level 1 screening at this point in time, and trying to get your input on that criteria. Again, there are going to be 2 additional levels of screening, where with each level of screening, you'll have the opportunity to provide input and feedback and perspective on the information that we are discussing and going over through each step of our PEL study process. Alternatives will advance, and those advancing alternatives that continue to advance through our PEL study will be considered our PEL recommendations and our range of reasonable alternatives. And with that, I will hand it over to Anna to go over our next steps.
So before we enter the question and answer portion of tonight's meeting, I want to point out that this is not, we want to hear your comments tonight, and they will be recorded, but this is not the only opportunity that you'll have to provide feedback on the project in general, or even on tonight's subject matter. We would ask, or we do ask, that you send comments on tonight's, what was covered tonight, to us by September 30th, the end of the month. How you can do that if you don't comment tonight is you can leave a message. You can leave a question or a comment on our website 24 hours a day. You can also sign up to receive email updates on the website. In addition to questions or comments about what we discussed tonight, we have a live survey up on the website. You can access it on the front page of our website, and you can fill that out too and leave feedback that way as well. So next steps as far as upcoming public meetings, we intend that the 3rd public meeting will occur November, December. We anticipate it might still be virtual, but of course that's subject to change. What will be covered there are the level 1 screening results, and then we'll go over the level 2 evaluation criteria, which includes urban design, community considerations, and of course we'll get your input and questions. The 4th public meeting is anticipated to occur in February or March of 2023. And there we will go over the results of the level 2 screening. So the options that we now have on the table will be much more narrowed down at that point. And then we'll go over the level 3 or final evaluation criteria. And of course, always followed by a Q&A session. So, next slide, please. One more time, I know I've talked incessantly about the website, but in addition to signing up for email updates to learn about upcoming events or public meetings such as this one, you can leave a question, leave a comment, learn more about the project. And excuse me, next slide, please. So before, I'm going to turn it over now to Jonathan Dean, the new mix project manager from CONDOT, to facilitate the question and comments. And as a reminder, while this portion of the presentation is going on, you can also email us at the New Mix Waterbury, follow us on social media to find out what events we're going to be at. For example, this weekend, we are going to be at the Watertown Fall Fest. You can have a one-on-one conversation with us, ask us more specific questions than you might want to ask in this forum, although you're definitely welcome to ask specific questions or lengthy questions in this forum. And with that, I will turn it over to Jonathan Dean from CONDOT.
Great, thank you, Anna. So yeah, again, before we open things up, just to highlight a couple other things that we'll be doing. As the study is ongoing, we have our public informational meetings as was laid out a couple of slides ago. We're also meeting we have a project advisory committee that I see some folks on here that are part of the PAC, and we appreciate your involvement. So folks from the city of Waterbury, NBCOG, some of the local businesses and organizations. So we will be working and meeting with them throughout that time. And we have these community events that we'll be attending. Our social media is ongoing and always posting nice facts and updates about the study. So got a lot of outreach going on besides these meetings that we're holding. So with that, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to raise your hand or just type it into the chat if you would rather do that. And we'll answer them as they come in. Karen, you have a question?
Yes, I just want to make sure I understand correctly. So right now, I mean, you're basically going over the process that you're following to eventually narrow down the options. So the feedback that you're looking for now, is that just relative to the process that you're going through, or do you want feedback on some of the alternatives?
Yeah, we'd love feedback on the alternatives as well. So you can kind of browse those on the website if you have time and submit feedback to those. We'd love to hear what you think about really anything, but we also would like feedback on our process as well. So we presented those screening criteria to you also. Okay. So really it's all fair game.
All right, I'll take a look at the website. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments? And again, as soon as this meeting ends, if you think of something, feel free to go on the website or send us an email here. Thomas, please go ahead.
Yeah, hi, thanks for the presentation. Well done. Thanks for staying late and everything. Just had a question on if there is a high level preference for a partial interchange or a complete interchange at this level. I'd personally be in favor of complete, but I know there's a lot of factors if it doesn't work out, but just wanted to get your opinion.
I can't give you a preference, honestly, because they're going to kind of all go through that funnel that Naomi showed you earlier. So as David noted, there are some movements in the interchange that don't carry as high of a level of traffic as others. So for example, if you're going Route 8 northbound to I-84 westbound, that tends to be not as heavily used as folks going northbound Route 8 into I-84 eastbound. But, you know, there's just a lot of factors that we're juggling, and, you know, it's probably the ideal is to have a complete, you know, system interchange with the highway connections, but this is a very constrained area. And so there might have to be some adjustments and accommodations that are made.
Thank you.
Thanks. Anybody else? Any questions or comments? And again, so this was a lot of information. Be great if you could take the time to kind of flip through the alternatives on our website when you do get a chance. I'll just give one more last call for this meeting. Again, not the last call for comments, but you know, don't want to take up everybody's time here. So if there are no further questions, you know, I think we can wrap this up. So again, thank you so much for taking the time out of your schedules, and we really appreciate it. And we hope you'll be involved in future meetings. Please keep coming.
Thank you.